Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Chavav is also continuing the topic of Isur Hana, things which are forbidden to derive any benefit or use from. The primary discussion of the Daf is a machlokes between Abaye and Rava. The Gemara is going to try to bring proofs to either side. The Gemara will take a detour in the middle to discuss the halacha of smelling something which is asur b'hana. Is smelling considered to be hana? If you get a good smell from it, that'll be one subject that'll be discussed. And at the last quarter of the daf, the Gemara will refer back to the Mishnah and discuss the halacha of lighting a fire and burning things which are asur b'hana, and if you use it to cook or to create some other permanent effect, is that effect asur because it was caused with a fire fueled by Isur Hana? So, first of all, we're on the subject of machlokes Abaye and Rava. Now, there are two versions of what this machlokes Abaye and Rava is. The Gemara primarily focuses on the second version. According to the second version, we are discussing a situation where somebody is getting Hana from Isur Hana, but he's stuck, he can't avoid it, it is too difficult or not feasible to avoid it. He's in a situation where he has to be there. But he is intending to get the Hana. So the question is as follows. If he wouldn't be intending, so there wouldn't be any problem. He's stuck there. It's not his fault that he's getting Hana from. The question is the fact that he's enjoying it and he's intending to get Hana from it, does that make it forbidden? And the machlokes Abaye and Rava is in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who doesn't place too much importance in kavana. Does this kavana matter in this situation? So the opinion of Rav is that it is asur, and the opinion of Abaye is that it is mutter. So the Gemara first brings a list of proofs. The first proof is from the Heichel, the building of the Beis HaMikdash itself. We know that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would sit, he would gather a group of people to learn halacha, and they would sit in the shade of the Heichel, and that's where he would teach them. Now here, there was no alternative here because there was no other Beis Medrash large enough to hold everybody in the halachas that he needed to teach, and he's using the Beis HaMikdash. He's using the Heichel for private Hana. He's using it to shade them from the sun. So how are you allowed to do that? It must be that in a situation where you can't avoid it, the fact that you're intending to get Hana from something which is Kodesh or Asur b'Hana is not a problem. So the Gemara says, that's a kasha on Rava. Rava will answer that this is different because this is not the way the Heichel, the building of the Beis HaMikdash, is intended to be used. This is not the proper use of it. That's called a Hana, which is not its stated intent. That's not how it's meant to be used. Something which is Asur b'Hana that's used in its improper way is not a violation of the Isur Hana. Okay, the Gemara's next proof is from the fact that when workers needed to fix the wall of the Kodesh HaKodashim, they would be lowered from the attic into the Kodesh HaKodashim through holes, and they were put in a box, in a crate, so that they couldn't see the Kodesh HaKodashim. We didn't want them to feast their eyes, the Gemara says, on the beauty of the Kodesh HaKodashim. That implies that it's also for them to do so. Now there, they had to go in there. There's no other way to fix the wall. Well, why would it be asur? It's also a situation where you couldn't avoid being there and you're having intent to get enough from it. That's what we're afraid of. And then that obviously would be asur. It's a proof to Rava against Abaye. So Gemara answers, this is not a halacha. This is a special extra precaution we take with the Kodesh HaKodashim, but it's not actually forbidden. And the proof of that is that Rav Shimon ben Pazi says that there is no isur to see, smell, or hear any sound which is Kodesh Kodashim. It's not called Me'ilah. It's not called a violation of the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash if you see, smell, or hear something pleasurable from it. That's not an actual physical use. So therefore, there couldn't be any problem here. The only thing is that we have an extra precaution, we have an extra level to which we hold the Kodesh HaKodashim itself. Now, another version of this same Gemara is that the kasha was actually from Rav Shimon ben Pazi's statement itself. He says that it's not Me'ilah if you see, smell, or hear something from the Beis HaMikdash. That implies that it is asur. You're still not supposed to do it. It's just not a violation of Me'ilah. you do not bring a carbon me'ila for doing something like that. And the question is, why is it aser? And the answer that the answer that Abaye would give would be that it's not talking about the people that are inside the Beis HaMikdash and have to be there. It's talking about the people that are outside the Beis HaMikdash. They don't have to be looking around. For them, it's a situation where they don't have to be there. If they choose to be there, then they are completely held responsible for it, and that has nothing to do with our scenario over here. Now, the Gemara takes a break from discussing the Machlokes Abaye and Rava, and the Gemara analyzes the statement of Rav Shimon ben Pazi, who said that it's not forbidden to smell a smell. It's not me'ila if one smells some of the scents of the Beis HaMikdash. Specifically, that refers to the ketoras, which is burned in the heichal and gives a very beautiful smell. So the Gemara asks, well, how could you tell me that that's not me'ila? We have a Brisa that clearly says that it is. The Brisa says, quoting the pasuk that says it is forbidden for somebody to make ketoras on his own for the purpose of smelling, and if he does do that, he violates kares. He has a punishment of kares. So the Brisa says it's only if he makes it in order to smell it that there's kares. If he makes it in order to practice or in order to donate it to the public, there is no kares there. And if he smells the burning ketoras in the Beis HaMikdash, so he is not liable to kares, but he still has violated the Isser Me'ila. Again, that's another example of something which doesn't have kares, but it is in Isser Me'ila. Now that directly contradicts Rav Shimon ben Pazi, who said that there's no Me'ila for smelling burning ketoras. So the Gemara answers Rav Shimon ben Pazi was talking about after the ketoras is already burned. It's not that he smelled the ketoras himself. He smelled the ketoras after it's burned, and its smoke is already risen, it's already gone straight up, the mitzvah is performed. After a mitzvah is performed, the kedusha is no longer there. It's not longer reserved for the Beis HaMikdash use, and anybody's allowed to smell it is not a problem. Gemara says, is that true? Anything which has kedusha that the mitzvah is performed, there's no isser anymore? That's not true. We see the halacha of trumas hadeshen, which is ash that's removed from the mizbeach and placed on the ground near the mizbeach. The Torah says, "V'samai etz mizbeach," you should put it there in order that it not be used for something else, because there is me'ila. If you use that ash, that would be me'ila, and once you place it on the ground, it's absorbed into the ground so that nobody should use it. And we have a specific halacha. It says, "V'samai," you got to put it there. So that teaches me that you see there clearly that even though the mitzvah was already performed with this ash, there still would be an isser me'ila if it wouldn't be absorbed into the ground and set aside. So how could you tell me that anything that its mitzvah is already performed, there's no me'ila anymore? You see clearly that Trumas Hadeshen, there is such a mitzvah. There is an isser me'ila, even though its mitzvah is already performed. So Gemara answers, there are two such things. They are exceptions. There are two things that have an isser me'ila or have an isser use in isser not, even though their mitzvah has already been performed. And those two things are the exception. And we learn that all other types of mitzvahs or kedushas do not have kedusha after the mitzvah has already been performed. We learn that from the fact that these two things are stated. We have a rule, shnei ksuv ban ke'echad ein malamdu. Whenever the Torah tells me the same halacha in two situations, it's meant to limit it. If it would only say it once, I would learn from there to other places. If it says it twice, it's limiting, because the second time is not needed. Obviously, it's limiting only these two. What are the two? One of them is the Trumas Hadeshen, which we've just discussed. The other one is the Bigdei Kahuna that the Kohen Gadol wore when he went into the Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippur, a special set of white clothing. He wore those. The pasuk says, "V'hini chamsham," he has to leave them there. They have to stay there, meaning it can't be used for anything else, even though its mitzvah is already performed. So there you have the second case, and it's limited to there. But all other circumstances in which a mitzvah is already performed, the kedusha is no longer on it, and there is no isser me'ila or hanal. Now the Gemara says that works according to the opinion of the Rabbanan, who hold that that's the halacha for the Bigdei Kahuna that the Kohen Gadol wore. That's why it says if Hini Cham Sham, he should leave it there. He should be left there to stay there. However, there is Rabbi Daisa who argues and doesn't learn that way. He says, actually what that pasuk teaches me is that I shouldn't use the same clothing next year. The Kohen Gadol needs a new set of white clothing to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim every year. However, this old set is not Asar Bahana anymore. This old set is usable to all other Kohanim. They're allowed to use it. They also wear white clothing sometimes, so they're allowed to use it. So you don't have two examples of where there is an Isser that ends when the mitzvah is performed, and therefore you don't have such halacha limited. That being the case, I should learn from Trumas Hadeshen that every time mitzvah is performed, the Isser still applies. So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Daisa, I would use a third source, which for him will be the second, and I still have two. The third source is by Egla Arufa. Egla Arufa is a mitzvah that's performed with a cow, a calf that's taken to a stream, and it's killed as a kapara for a person who wasn't taken care of. And the Torah says harufa, and it says sham. You should do it there. Means it has to stay there. It can't go anywhere else. You cannot use it afterwards. So here you have an example of something that its mitzvah was performed, and it still has kedusha, explicitly given that by the Torah. Therefore, I have two examples of that, and I would assume that therefore it does not apply anywhere else. And that's why the ketoras, after its mitzvah was performed, it's permitted to smell it, even though smelling would otherwise be a significant usage of what would be considered to be asur. The Gemara just says one final point over here. The Gemara says not everybody agrees to this rule that when the Torah says something twice, you cannot extend it to anywhere else. According to that opinion, how would you know this halacha is limited to these two cases? The Gemara says because that opinion will say that here it's actually written as a limit. It's not just that there's two examples, it's that it's written in a limited way. It says v'samai and ha'arufa, that only you should put the Chumas Hadeshen there, not other things. Other things don't have this. It's limited to this. And ha'arufa, it only applies to the Egla Arufa. It doesn't apply to anything else. It doesn't have these limitations. The Gemara now returns to the series of proofs to the Mechlokas Abaye and Rava as to what's halach if somebody cannot avoid being in the situation that he's in, where he's getting hana, but he does intend to enjoy it. So the Gemara's next proof is from a situation where you take an Egla Arufa cow. You're not supposed to work it. It's not supposed to be used. You take the Egla Arufa cow and you hitch it to a team of cows so that it can nurse from its mother, who's one of the cows that's working. Now, what ends up happening is that this team of cows is working. Let's say they are threshing. They're stepping on grain in order to thresh them to break off the husks. And this calf threshes while it's hitched there. So what's happening is that it's performing work, and you are getting hana out of it, but you couldn't avoid it. You had to hitch the calf to its mother in order that it should be able to nurse. We still see that the fact that it's threshing while it's there is considered to be a violation of the Isser to use the Egla Arufa calf, and therefore it's now puzzled to be used as an Egla Arufa. So the Gemara says this is different. There's a special halacha about the calf of the Egla Arufa. It says Asher lo yu'bad ba, that no work was performed through it. It's written in a especially inclusive language, which teaches that even if you didn't intend, even if you're not responsible for it, any work that happens by this calf makes it impossible from then on. It's not following the classic rules of where you are using something for your own purpose and where you're not. The Gemara says, well, if you have such an inclusive rule, so then the halacha should be the same, even if it wasn't put there to nurse. Even if you just hitched a cow to a team and it did threshing, but you didn't put it there, you didn't have any intent for it to be there, so then it should also be forbidden. How come the halacha there is that it's kosher? So the Gemara says that the halacha that we learn from the Pesukim of Egla Arufa is that any work which is performed which you are pleased with, you wanted it to be there and you wanted it to be in that situation, that's where it becomes possible. If you have zero interest, it just happened, then it does not make a psul, and we find the same halacha by a paraduma. A paraduma is also not allowed to be worked. However, if a bird lands on your paraduma, even though it's doing work by holding the bird, it's not considered work, it's not an issue. On the other hand, if it's mounted by a male, that is considered work that you're pleased with, and that does make it puzzle from then on. Where do we see these two halachas, both by Egla Arufa and by Para Aduma, that it becomes puzzle if some work happens that you're pleased with, even if you don't actually work it? So the reason is because the language of the pasuk, it says Asher lo ubad ba, which is a passive term. It has not worked. There hasn't been work performed through it, but it's spelled Asher lo ovad ba. It's spelled without a vav. It's pronounced ubad, but it's spelled without a vav, that you didn't work it. And therefore we need something between the two, between you working and between work happening through it, is something that work happened on its own, but you were pleased and happy about it. That's the situation in which it would be a violation of the Isser to use it, and therefore both the Paraduma and the Egla Arufa in that case would be puzzle. The Gemara now moves on to its next proof, and that is if you found a lost sheet or cloth, so the halacha is you can't use it. You're not allowed to use it for yourself. It's not yours. You're just watching it and taking care of it until its rightful owner reclaims it. But you are allowed to spread it out for its own health to prevent it from becoming moldy or moth-eaten. Now, what if you have guests visiting you and you want to spread it out for its own use? So that's forbidden. So Gemara says, so here you clearly see, you can't avoid it, you have to spread it out for its own use, but it's forbidden anyway because you're going to get something out of it. You will get the honor that people are impressed by the fancy cloth that you have. So it's the same case. You can't avoid it and yet you're enjoying it and you see that it's forbidden. Proof to Rava. Gemara says, no, here the problem is not that you're getting use out of it, here the problem is that people will see it and they will have an ayin ra, they'll be jealous of it. And either they'll come steal it, or they'll make an ayin hara and shemayim, and it'll end up becoming destroyed. Either way, you're actually damaging the cloth, and that's why it's problematic. That concludes the Gemara's proof list of proofs on this version of the Machlokes Abaye and Rava. The Gemara has one proof which is conclusive in the other version of what the Machlokes Abaye and Rava was. According to that version, the Machlokes is in the exact opposite case, where you could avoid the situation where you're getting enough from it, but you don't, and not because you intend to get enough from it. You put yourself in a situation where you get enough from it, but you do not intend to enjoy it. You're just using it for its own sake. You aren't intending to get any hana out of it. So, what's the case that's a proof on this subject? It's about hilchos shatnez, somebody who is a clothing dealer, and he's not supposed to wear or enjoy clothing that has shatnez in it. But as a dealer, the halacha is he's allowed to wear it to show it off, to advertise it, as long as he's not intending to get any hana out of it, as long as he's not intending to have it protect him from the rain or from the sun. Now, that's the halacha. However, people who are extra careful, says a brisa, what they would do is they would just sling it over their backs so that they're not actually wearing it. They're not putting themselves in a situation of wearing it, even though it would be permitted as long as they didn't have intent for hana, but they would avoid it anyway. So now the Gemara says, now here, obviously, this is a situation which can be avoided. Everybody could just do the way the careful people did. They could just throw it over their backs, and it's not called wearing it. Yet the halacha is, as long as the people did not intend to get hana out of it, then it's fine. There's no isser. So you see clearly, like Abaye, that it's not usser in this situation where you could have done it differently, but you did not. You chose to do it the wrong way, but you didn't intend to get any hana out of it. The Gemara concludes that is a conclusive proof, at least according to this version, that the halacha is like Abaye. Okay, now the Gemara refers back to the Mishnah to discuss where you lit a fire, you fueled a fire with chametz. We had seen in the Mishnah that that's usher from the time that chametz is usher b'hana. The Gemara will discuss what happens when you're fueling any fire with any iser hana. Now, we know you're not allowed to fuel a fire with iser hana. The question is, what about the thing that you accomplished with that fire? Let's say you baked bread in an oven fueled with iser hana. Does the bread become usher now? So, how is the heat transferred to the bread? If you put the bread in the oven after the iser hana was already destroyed, all that was left was coals, which is burned, so then it's not a problem because it's the coals that's heating the bread to bake it, and that's already not usher b'hana anymore. It's fully destroyed. However, if you put the bread in there while there was flame, and what's actually burning is the iser hana, and it's still there, so now you have a machlokes tanaim. Rebbe says that's usher. The bread, when you take the bread afterwards, it has the value of the iser hana in it. Its current state was created by the heat, which was fueled by iser hana, and therefore you're walking around with iser hana value. You're walking around with value which is forbidden, but no, you have to throw the bread out. You can't use it. The Rabbanan, however, say no, you were not allowed to use the fuel, but the bread itself doesn't have any. It doesn't have the fuel in it. It doesn't have iser hana in it. It's just a changed state. Because of the fuel, it's not itself usher. You're allowed to use the bread. Now, there's conflicting brisas about the oven itself. If the oven's an old oven that's already been used, it's not improved in any way by the fire that burned within it, it's fine, there's no iser on the oven. If, however, it was a new oven, the first time you fire it, you harden it, and that completes the construction of the oven. The oven was made out of clay, it had to be hardened by the fire within it. So we have conflicting brisas as to whether the oven becomes usher if its first use was fueled by iser hana. The oven itself is now made, it's completed with iser hana heat. Does that make the oven usher? So the Gemara says, no problem. Conflicting brises. One is Rebbe, one is the Rabbanan. Rebbe says there's a problem if the fuel was Isser Hana, and that creates a lasting effect in the object, just like the bread, the same thing would apply to the oven. And the Rabbanan would say, no, there's no problem. The Gemara says, no, you can't tell me the one that says the Isser is oven is Rebbe, because you cannot apply the fact that the bread becomes Isser to the oven becoming Isser. Why is that? Because the bread is fueled totally by Isser Hana. The only thing that created it into the bread state is Isser Hana. However, when you say the oven's Isser, what you mean is that the bread that you're going to bake in the oven later will be Isser, and that's why you can't use the oven. That's the only function of it. But that bread that you're going to bake later, the bread will be baked by whatever you're fueling your next fire with. That won't be Isser Hana. The fact that the oven was created with fuel of Isser Hana means that there are two parts to the bread which you'll subsequently bake in the oven. It's got the advantage of the fuel of that fire, and it's got the advantage of the fuel which completed the work of the oven. That's two things combining together to make a piece of bread. You don't see that Rebbe holds that two things combining together to make Isser, that's a problem. Who told you that Rebbe holds that way? So the Gemara says, you're right, it's not Rebbe, it's Rebbe Elazar. There's an opinion of Rebbe Eliezer that says that whenever you have Isser which is caused by two things, one Isser and one Heter, it's considered to be Asr. So that's why here also he would say that the oven is Asr. The Rabbanan would say, no, you have two things combined together, that the Isser aspect is not enough to create whatever it is that you have, and therefore it's not Asr. What's the case of Rabbi Eliezer? So he's talking about chametz, where you made bread. Now the way they made bread rise was they put in something called sourdough. That was a piece of dough itself that became moldy and filled with yeast. They put that in the bread, and that caused it to rise. So the question is, what happens if you put two pieces of sourdough, which is pretty much yeast, in a dough, and it rises? Well, one of those two pieces was Isser Hana, and one of those two pieces was not Isser Hana, and they both together caused it to rise. So, if neither piece of sourdough had enough to cause the dough to rise, so then it means that the Isser itself couldn't do it. So there you have a machlokes. The Chachamim say it's not a problem, it's fine, the Isser couldn't perform it. Rabbi Eliezer says you follow the last one. If the heter dough was in there first and it wasn't able to do the job, and then you brought the Isser sourdough and you put it in, that took it across the border between not able to make it rise and able to make it rise. Your Isser sourdough is what created the rising here. Now, what happens if you put the Isser in first and it couldn't complete the job, and then you put the Heter in and then it completed the job? So Rabbi Eliezer says, listen, you follow the last one. The last one was Heter. It's not a problem. Says Abaye, Rabbi Eliezer only says that if you took away the first piece of Isser and then put in the second piece, which is Heter. That way, when you're actually getting across the border from not able to make the dough rise to make the dough rise, the only thing there is the Heter. If, however, you left the Isser there, even if it was there first, and then you added Heter, then the dough becomes Asr. Even though it was the Heter that was added second and took it across the border of not rising to rising, since the Isser was there at the same time and the two of them are working together, anytime you have two things working together, it creates Isser, if one of them is Isser, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer, you see, clearly holds that when two things are working together and one of them is Asr, the final product is Asr, and he would be the one who says that the oven, which was fired with Isser Hana, is now forbidden to use because the bread, you'll break in it later, has two advantages in it. It has the wood burned in the end, and it has the original wood which fired the oven and hardened it and completed its work, and that was also.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.